Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to InFocus, a weekly program where we take a closer look at what's happening within and across the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, your government. On today's program, we feature an insightful conversation on the evolving landscape of foreign policy in an increasingly interconnected and fast-changing world. Small islands like St. Kitts and Nevis must remain both proactive and adaptable in its diplomatic strategy. Now, the political landscape has shifted significantly in the past year with traditional partners. How have these transitions impacted our diplomatic relations? Joining us today to discuss these is the Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas, Senior Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Investment. Stay with us for InFocus, your government, your business. Thanks for staying with us and allow me to welcome back to our program the Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas, as mentioned, Senior Minister for Foreign Affairs. So welcome, it's always good to have you on our program.
Always good to respond to a request.
Right, okay, so Senior Minister, there's a lot to get into because as I mentioned, of course, foreign policy, it's constantly changing and there are a lot of new issues in relation to the United States, a lot of new developments in the United Kingdom, in the Middle East, and so we want to jump right into it. We'll get to those a bit later, but we'll start closer to home. So what can you tell us in terms of the changes, what St. Kitts and Nevis's foreign policy looks like in 2025 at this current time?
Well, I think the foreign policy that we are pursuing to a large extent has been framed over the years through different governments, different regimes. And where we are now is simply trying to be much more proactive and to be more focused at the same time, given the fact that there are some fundamental changes that have taken place around the world, not only in the traditional democracies, but also in countries which to a large extent may not have been included in those states which we would say would have had democratic elections, etc. over the years. So we have become much more proactive, we have become much more focused, because the intention really is for us to be present at the level of the international community. And in particular, because of our peculiar circumstance, a small island developing state, all the way back in the Caribbean region, one of the latest to have become independent in the chain of islands that had previous colonial past. And so we want to make sure that our voice is heard, that the world knows that St. Kitts and Nevis exists. And the people of St. Kitts and Nevis living in a small island developing state in the Caribbean region want to be heard and want to participate in active international dialogue on global issues.
Right. Can you talk to us briefly about some of those changes that you just mentioned, that it has changed some, and How has the government reacted to those changes in terms of adapting the foreign strategy, the strategy in terms of engaging diplomatically and other engagements?
Right. We have made sure that we have a presence in the main theaters of the world. United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Commonwealth of Nations. We, as CARICOM, has reached out to a number of countries with which we have bilateral relationship, the United States of America, the United Kingdom. We've now gone into the Middle East. Yes, we had somewhat of a presence there, maybe some back in 2010, 2004, around there, in terms of our presence in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai in particular, as a result of the transition of the economy. And we were pursuing then the CBI, the Citizenship by Investment Program. So we were there, but now we are there in a different way. We are there to make sure that as we showcase what it is that we are seeking to achieve, a small island state, that they can be part of it. They can not only understand it within the wider context of climate change and the need for climate action on our part, but that they would know that we can work together to, for them to achieve some of their own global ends, and we too would be able to achieve what we want for our people here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Now, persons looking at this program live or on the replay would have seen during our break some pictures that actually was from COFCO, which is a CARICOM meeting that was held here in St. Kitts. And we're going to discuss that a bit more later. But I want to just touch on something that I mentioned last week when Minister responsible for Environment, Sustainable Development, the Honorable Dr. Joy Clark was here.
Right.
And it seems like St. Kitts and Nevis is once again leading in the regional and international global arena. That our voice is once again resonating in certain quarters, very loudly, I should mention. Now, just to name some of the areas that it seems that we've led on. We've led the region in efforts to reform and harmonize the Citizenship for Investment programs. In participating countries, the Prime Minister has led on having crime, looking at it from a public health issue, a perspective in that regard. The Green Climate Fund, the Regional Dialogue Forum, met in St. Kitts and Nevis for the very first time in March. And GSIS, which is the Global Sustainable Island Summit, which the Minister spoke in depth about last week, is convening here later this month.
Good.
What is driving this recognition of St. Kitts and Nevis by international partners and agencies?
Right. Very important in the sense that, as I said before, St. Kitts is one of the smallest developing countries, independent countries. If we do not present ourselves in the international arena, we can easily be forgotten. Climate change is affecting not only large countries, but it affects small countries more so than any other country. That is why, for our own survivability, it is critical that on the agenda of climate action, in order to what is happening as a result of climate change, that people hear what we have to say, what we are feeling, and how we believe we can be positively saved as a result of their support for what we are requesting. And so you're right, the CBI, there was a time when we led. We went around the world promoting it, in the Middle East, all over. And then, of course, other countries followed. And then there was need for change to be made to the program. And again, St. Kitts and Nevis sat down with partners in the Eastern Caribbean in particular, and had a memorandum of agreement as to how the program should progress, especially since we all agree that we need the program for our own sustenance and economic development. The same thing happens with the climate action and climate change. Dr. Clark, very much foremost, very much frontal, very much capable in the international arena, has basically had the full support of our government in bringing to this country a number of global partners who would not only see what we are seeking to do as a country, but would be able to lend their own support for us to have the necessary action and relief from the changes of climate the deterioration that we are seeing here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So, again, you mentioned the Global Fund. If we are going to successfully prepare for support for the changes that are going to be required, we need funding. And that is why bringing partners here who are engaged in the Climate Fund, that's going to be important because funding is going to be critical. So I think it all comes together, mainly because we have players who are in the government, who are making outreach to the international community, individuals, organizations, and countries, so that we can be brought on board in their own deliberations, whether in their own countries or in international fora or theaters, wherever they are in the world, so that St. Kitts and Nevis continues to be a focus of attention. We need to do that. That's what the foreign policy is doing, making sure that our voice is heard and we are present as well across the different theaters of the world.
And of course, by seeing the developments here in St. Kitts and Nevis when you visit, you're able to get an appreciation for, as you mentioned, how climate change is impacting us as a small and developing state, but also the tremendous potential. Of course, geothermal was one of the areas that was showcased during the Green Climate Fund when they had their meeting here. A special invitation was extended to the head of the GCF who went to Nevis. And GCIS also is going to have that focus as well on geothermal, which is something that is very impactful. How do you think, Dr. Douglas, having all of this type of exposure to what is happening in St. Kitts and Nevis and the talents that are here would help to impact the national development agenda and also will extend to all people living in the diaspora and here in the country?
The national development agenda is to ensure that our people survive despite the challenges that we face outside. How can we survive? We're talking about energy security. If we do not transition from our dependence on fossil fuel, we will be left behind. Therefore, it is important to convince the international community and our friends that transition to our dependence on renewable energy is critical. That's why I think the importance emerges with regard to the geothermal project. That's why what we're doing in terms of solar also becomes critically important as we transition the dependence on fossil fuel. Then, of course, we talk about food security. But even before I go to food security, water, because that is one of the immediate challenges that our people face daily.
Daily, yes.
We, for some reason, well, I wouldn't say for some reason because we know the reason, but there has not been the follow-up that should have taken place many years ago after the fundamental policy that was laid down by Dr. Christmas and Rollins and those guys when they were there planning the development of the country, looking to ensure that water is there. We dropped the ball there. And now we have to pick up the ball because you can't get really to where you want to go to food security unless you have water.
That's right.
So we must have water. But water, groundwater, needs to come up, one. Two, if it is not coming up, you have to desalinate. All that requires energy. That's why the transitioning from fossil fuel energy, which is enormously expensive, to something that is cheaper and much more sustainable. So water becomes critical, energy becomes critical, food security becomes critical. We are now being challenged. You see what is happening with regard to the increases in possible prices.
Yes, inflation, yes.
Inflation, the tariffs that are being imposed and so forth. It means then that we have to really begin to eat what we grow and grow what we eat and export the balance if we have excess. So this is why I believe that, again, the foreign policy is geared towards attaining these specific objectives that we have set for ourselves in our development strategy and plan for St. Kitts and Nevis. They all come together to make sure that they are all properly financed, properly resourced, and properly planned for in terms of the preparation of the human resource. We don't want to bring guys from Saudi Arabia to help us with our geothermal, or from the UAE. We want to be able for our young trained minds as engineers to develop the capacity. So it all goes hand in hand. As we plan for our development, we plan for the education of our brilliant young people who we know can do it. And so they are also included in the future plans for going forward.
And of course, that is something that persons from St. Kitts and Nevis have been known for, to excel in wherever area that they carve out in the international arena. I believe the term that is used is when they find their niche, they're able to excel in different areas. And that actually leads to my next question. So where St. Kitts and Nevis is pursuing a bid for representation on the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Now, that council is one of the 6 principal organs of the UN and is responsible for coordinating the organization's work on economic and social issues. Can you tell us about this?
Right. The Economic and Social Council is critically important at the level of the United Nations. I believe it attracts maybe as many as more than 50 or so members. And every rotation, you tend to have about 18 new persons elected. Why do we wish to be there? Again, the world must hear us. If we identify our challenges, the world must also hear us in terms of what we think are the possible solutions. And this council meets on a regular basis to look at, well, to plan the agenda for ongoing meetings that the UN will coordinate within the area that we are looking at, social, economic, and support development. Sitting on that council gives us the opportunity to help to set the agenda of those meetings. The agenda, therefore, must include some of the challenges that we are facing. We being considered a progressive small island developing state. Progressive. Mm-hmm. We have a high per capita income. So we are considered a little richer than other countries. But at the same time, we are small and we are vulnerable. One hurricane can destroy what we think is a preeminent economic position among our states. So we want to be there so that we can be part of the planning of the agenda and also speak in those meetings to the agenda items that would ensure that our development is sustained in the years to come. And so we are asking the international community at the level of the United Nations to vote for us. Mind you, we've been there before. We might have gotten there back in 2009, and again we repeated our position there. We slipped, now we are trying to get back on. Because if we are going to really impact the world and enthuse our own people and persons who are supporting our development, it is important that we sit at the table of those who are not only planning the agenda, but those who are finding the solutions according to the items on the agenda.
And of course, as we speak about, the international voice of St. Kitts and Nevis resonating once again, it's the importance of having this appointment. What strategies are being used? I imagine that there'll be sideline meetings, there'll be lobbying, there'll be, of course, support from CARICOM. I remember during the COFCO meeting here last week that there was a discussion about having someone appointed on the OAS Council. The region successfully was able to engage and get that person appointed. So I imagine we'll be using strategies such as that.
Of course. We want to make sure that the collective, united force of CARICOM is always there. You just mentioned it. For the first time, I think, in a long time, the Caribbean countries, the CARICOM countries, members of the OAS, stuck together. We chose a Caribbean candidate, Suriname, sorry. Yeah. And at first, some of our own did not think we could do it. But as we went along, we said we are supporting our own. After all, we are a body in the OAS. Yes, it's a large group, but we believe that if persons were not successful in splintering our vote, all votes go immediately to Suriname, which is exactly what happened. A unified front brought results for the first time in the history of the OAS. It has been led by a Caribbean person, a CARICOM person out of Suriname. Mr. Ramden, fully experienced, has been foreign minister, was in fact assistant secretary general before, was foreign minister, got elected, and now he takes up his seat in a few weeks' time as the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. So what it means really is that we have to leverage our numbers. We have to show we are a united group when it comes to critical matters of placing our people in the right place at the right time. Right. And that is really what the basic philosophy is in terms of St. Kitts and Nevis supporting CARICOM and ensuring that we are at one voice on these matters.
And of course, we can expect that same support for the UN.
With regard to what we are asking, is the same thing.
Right.
Recently, last week, as you mentioned, the CARICOM colleagues were here, chairmanship of the Council for Foreign Relations shifted to us from Dominica, and we went through an item on the agenda, candidatures. We looked at all of the forums around the world where candidates are to be elected at sometime this year, a few months' time, and up to maybe the next few years. And we said, we are going for this, and we will have the full support of CARICOM. It's only a matter of time, and we will see what happens. That is how we do it. We lend support, and when we ask for support, we expect to get support.
Right. And of course, as mentioned, we're going to touch on COFCO a bit later on in our program, but I have to ask Dr. Douglas, as you speak about positioning our persons in the diaspora and locally here to go out and to give their international contribution, what about the persons who work within the ministry itself now? Of course, there's a growing list of diplomatic allies and increasing diplomatic engagements that takes place around the world. I recall Minister Clark, of course, as we mentioned, GCIS, it was held for the first time last year in Prince Edward Island, and so there are these new engagements that are popping up. So how can we ensure, or should I say, what strategies is the ministry putting in place to ensure that staff development is enhanced at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that includes at the junior level and also the executive level?
Good. We insist that we must have persons out there in our various consulates and embassies who are experienced and who are trainable and trained. Once we would have achieved putting key people in different theaters around the world, the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, UAE, we then make sure that opportunities for training of that supplemental staff is ongoing. We make it our business as we sit with countries from time to time who come to visit us, like later this afternoon, I'll be meeting the Italian representative of the Italian government. Training. One of the first things that we discuss, training. mainly because training is expensive. We don't have the capacity to do a lot of it ourselves, so we ask second and third country to assist us. So training is critical, training of our staff. We not only encourage our people to go on training overseas, on courses, long-term courses, maybe bachelor's, master's, etc. But short-term courses also, we invite our people, our employees within the ministry to get that training. Encourage them to do, even here at CFBC, we encourage them to get themselves up to speed. We have them attached to different embassies of St. Kitts and Nevis outside. We rotate the members of staff in our various embassies. Maybe 3 years, you rotate, or shorter periods, we move accordingly. So a lot of it depends on our own training that we initiate at the national level, paid for by our government. But also we invite our counterparts around the world to provide us with those opportunities. Training is critical. One of the things that we always ask for when a country comes to ask us for some form of support, we said we need our training to be expanded. We need greater capacity of trained people. Provide us some scholarships for that to happen.
And the scholarships don't just extend, of course, to the ministry staff, but also generally for persons from St. Kitts and Nevis to apply for scholarships to pursue greater academic goals, of course. Scholarships for education in different areas.
Different disciplines in the country. Taiwan provides so many scholarships. Scholarships not only for people who are working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but throughout the wide spectrum of providing the necessary human resource, trained human resource that we require to move our country forward.
Right. Okay. Now, Dr. Douglas, of course, you would have accompanied our Prime Minister, the Honorable, Dr. Terence Drew, to recent engagement in the United States with the Secretary of State. We're going to touch on that a bit more, but we're going to take our first break.
Thank you.
Stay with us, viewers and listeners. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
Honorable Minister Douglas, you are assuming the chairmanship of this council at a time of increasing uncertainty and global challenges. We look forward to your leadership.
We are in very interesting times. Right, Honorable Dr. Douglas? I'm very happy to vacate the chair so that you can take it. I wish I was serving after you because I know that there's a lot you still have to teach us. Your experience, your seniority, of course, as a former Prime Minister of long standing, we know that you will be able to steer us in these very challenging times, very difficult times.
Welcome back to In Focus. We continue our discussion with the Senior Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzil Douglas, on foreign policy and global engagements and how it's impacting us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, having a very local impact here on our people. So, as we mentioned, Senior Minister, let's turn our attention now to St. Kitts and Nevis' engagement with traditional partners. Now, interestingly, we've seen new leaders elected in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he was elected in July 2024. The United States in November similarly had an election, and we saw the inauguration of President Donald Trump in January 2025. Of course, this would be his second stint as president of that country. And in Canada, Mark Carney became Prime Minister just last month. How have these changes impacted foreign policy with these countries, our foreign policy with these countries?
I think it has given us, these changes, I should say, have given us the opportunity to re-examine exactly where we are with our foreign policy. The UK election that brought the new Prime Minister into being, coming from the Labour Party, to some extent, that was clearly expected. The return of President Trump at one time was not expected, and then it became clear that he could upset the apple cart, and that has happened. And Canada, again, although the circumstances seemed a little different from what we normally would do here, where he became the Prime Minister before the election, and then went into the election and has won, unlike what we saw in Trinidad and Tobago. So we saw, to some extent, continuity, because the Liberals in Canada were again. But to some extent, the world has changed, even within the time that that type of government, that is party government, would have changed. The Trump election in particular, President Trump, I think was somewhat shocking. And then the policies that were being enunciated shortly after made our government clearly getting itself more prepared to deal with these challenges. You know what the challenges were. The trade policies. I mean, it was clear that the America First policy with regard to trade,
yes,
with regard to looking closely at what China was doing and how China was slowly emerging, those are important things that have affected us. And so, to a large extent, we were not unprepared, because we expect that things like those can happen. Because we saw the first blush of the Trump administration 4 years ago. So we knew to some extent that some of those things can continue. The migration policy, that to some extent would have affected. We were told that because of the criminal immigration policy, sending people back home, we basically became engaged in that very early. Sending people with a criminal background, maybe in prison there, coming from a third country, not St. Kitts and Nevis, that of course is a pause, because that's not something you can easily do. With regard to trade, the tariffs, eventually it has settled to 10%. Now, 10% of whatever we export to the United States of America would have, a tax and impose 10% will be on the goods entering the United States of America from the Caribbean region, from St. Kitts and Nevis. That, of course, is of concern, because we, as a member of the WTO, World Trade Organization, with the United States being a member, as far as we are aware, there was no consultation. It's just the imposition. But we, nevertheless, have had the opportunity to discuss this matter further. Because you would remember that the United States of America has been very supportive of the economic development of our country. Back in the 80s with President Reagan, the CBI, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, and this was supported by two recent legislations after it was first imposed, which lent support over the years to what we believe was supporting the development of trade opportunities in St. Kitts and Nevis and the United States. So that is a matter that is, to some extent, causing some concern. But if you look very closely at what has been happening over the years in terms of the export of St. Kitts and Nevis goods, OECS goods, CARICOM, to the United States, it has decreased significantly over the years. It means then that a lot of our private sector people had begun to shift their focus of attention in terms of import and export away from the US. Because, of course, we had seen as a first blush what President Trump was capable of doing when he was in office first time. So what has it done to us? One, it has given us the opportunity to get to the negotiating table and say to the United States, you're making these changes, but we need to discuss them. You just simply can't say you're going to withhold your support from the World Health Organization, for example, and we will do nothing and say nothing. We have to make sure you understand the implications of those decisions. World Health Organization supports PAHO. PAHO is the regional entity that ensures that Caribbean countries like ours are pursuing the right policies and programs with regard to not only domestic health, but global health. Mm-hmm. But the good thing about is that when we were there recently, there was the understanding that USAID, that's another organization that said, and we have been assured that, yes, okay, we've dismantled some of those things, but the financing of the programs will continue. So we wait and see what's happening there. We believe that every country has its right to pursue its own policies for its own economic and trade development. But at the same time, we are part of an international trading system, the WTO. This was being pushed by the United States. And so we believe that you should also apply those international rules to what you yourself are doing at the domestic level. Mm-hmm. I must say, too, for the comfort of our people, there are two major factories here that export to the United States in a significant way. We have house server control. Those young ladies and young men in Sandy Point, in that factory, they are making a significant contribution in the development of the United States of America by way of the items that they assemble and send off to the United States. Because most of them, a lot of them I should say, they go beyond the United States borders, and they are used in critical areas for the United States to maintain its supremacy in certain areas. So that's important. And also, we have Jaro Electronics. Jaro Electronics, major company, significant in terms of its contribution in our overall trade with the United States of America and other countries. We must do everything to preserve these because they employ people, real people, and a lot of people. Many of them are women, head of their households. Many of them are in the process of getting their own independence, getting their own homes, getting their children off to university. We have to make sure that their jobs are protected. So we will definitely negotiate with the United States of America with regard to any negative impact of the tariff changes on the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there was that engagement with Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Yes.
And I imagine that those were some of the discussions you just gave in your very extensive answer, some of the areas that I was going to ask in terms of USAID. I'm sure those things were discussed during that meeting with Secretary Rubio because, of course, Secretary Rubio also now heads USAID temporarily.
Exactly. Apart from the USAID, we also have the preparation of our countries to deal with disasters. We're talking about climate change. How can you, in this present circumstance, where the language is about climate change, withdraw from us the financing of the various operations of institutions that will assist us if we are struck by the disaster? How can you withdraw support when we are saying that we have to make sure that we can prepare ourselves to deal with the realities of life today? And we have been given the assurance, I must tell you, from that same meeting in Washington, that those will be preserved. And security, don't forget, national security. Mm-hmm. The United States, our greatest neighbor. Security of our countries, to a large extent, depend upon the support of initiatives by the United States to secure their outer borders. We are their outer borders. And so if we are not properly prepared and secured, they are not secured as well. So security is the other area that we shall push, because that brings benefits to all of us.
And that would include, of course, the shipping of guns from the United States.
Yes, of course.
Manufacture guns.
Yes.
Here. And so that is something very important that must be tackled. And I know
Right.
that the commitment was made previously by the previous administrations in the past. We've seen that we've gotten a lot of support in that area in terms of training. We actually held trade winds here during some time. And also I recall that there's been commitments made. Of course, the United States was assisted us in getting Stalwart, which is the first Coast Guard, and donated several vessels as well too. And so there's been commitments made in terms of helping with the radar systems and acquiring other resources. So those things were a part of the discussion.
In fact, we have been assured that the radar system, they will be installed. Necessary powers, that can be utilized, get information, will continue. Because that's critical for our own defense and security as a small nation.
And of course, we have a large population of U.S. citizens here as well too. And we appreciate, Dr. Douglas, that these meetings were very high level. And so there are certain details that necessarily can't be discussed because, of course, you're talking about foreign policy, and one change here can impact not just St. Kitts and Nevis, not just the region, but the entire world. And so we're looking forward to learn more about these commitments and them unfolding to benefit us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, an important point that you mentioned as we relate to sustainability and climate change, of course, the administration's policy, and I've asked this several times to different guests along the way, and so I have you here now and I ask you, in terms of our approach to transforming St. Kitts and Nevis, the government's approach, I should say, in terms of transforming St. Kitts and Nevis into a sustainable island state. We've seen the United States withdraw from COP, the Conference of Parties, and their view on some of the issues related to climate change is not in line with what we are proposing from St. Kitts and Nevis or from CARICOM, especially with that support. Is that support assured from St. Kitts and Nevis? Can St. Kitts and Nevis rely on the United States to be a partner in its transition to a sustainable island state?
I would say yes, because we do not want to increase any poverty here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We want to move out of poverty. The poorer you become, the more dependent you are on circumstances around you. United States can become a focused point for migration, illegal or otherwise, if things are so hard here that people have to find an outlet. It's a large country, large borders. So you don't want that. So it is in their interest that we are not made to suffer on pursuing policies which we know will bring us more benefits, more independence, rather than greater dependence on states, third states. So it can only be in the United States' interest if we are, to some extent, not allowed to descend into poverty. It's like what you saw with COVID. In the end, the international community had to provide opportunities for us to protect ourselves and our populations from the pandemic. So I believe that at the end of the day, the United States will have to be a partner that we can depend upon in consolidating our development, making sure that we prepare ourselves properly for the changes that are taking place in climate conditions, and that we put in place the necessary structures to supplement, consolidate our own independence and our growth forward. One example again is the CBI program. The CBI program took us to some extent out of poverty. It assisted us in transitioning from our dependence on the sugar industry to an economy of services led by hospitality and tourism. The United States, of course, has issues. Many countries have issues. But at the end of the day, we are saying, let's sit down and work out the challenges that we are facing. Let us hear some of the solutions that you may have. But to just simply shut it down is not going to be good for neither you nor us. So let us work out how best we can respond to the concerns that you have. And let us try to do it together. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have CBI, we need something else. What is there at the moment? Unless we become independent to do other things. And the changes that are fast approaching with regard to climatic conditions, if we are not able to withstand those changes, then we become parasites. We become parasites. And who wants to be a parasite?
Mm-hmm. And of course, hence the need for St. Kitts and Nevis to transition, to make that transition to sustainable island state, especially with energy. The Honorable Congressman, who's responsible for energy, he said power, the geothermal and energy security is key. Once you solve energy, you solve everything else. Because, of course, right, you would have tied it in terms of the water and food security and all of that. That's so, right. Persons listening to this program and following it on a regular basis would be aware of these messages. Dr. Douglas, we're almost out of time, so yes, I'm going to move quickly. But I do have to ask, as we speak about the international partners, of course, we see what's happening in Europe. A lot of far-right parties are also coming into power. They're forming the government again in popularity, which of course could have implications as well too in terms of some of our foreign policy and the support that we can expect from Europe. How do you expect this to impact us here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Right. I believe that from time to time we must expect these kind of changes. But we have been, I use the term smart, in our foreign policy, in that we've never really gone too far on any one side. I'm not going to say that we don't have support for critical countries. But it is not a case where we can say, oh, you know, we are non-aligned and so forth and so forth and so forth. Maybe translated to be that. But at the same time, we expect that there can emerge on the global stage in individual countries persons who are not necessarily partners that we would have had dealings with in the past. And that is why we are being pragmatic. How many years ago would anyone have thought that we would have a major presence in the Middle East? How many years ago? That was unthought of, unthinkable. But today, we are engaged in the Middle East. You may say, oh, they don't have elections and so forth and that kind of thing. But we are engaged because they are beginning to understand our plight. A lot of the economies are dependent on fossil fuel. But at the same time, they are the ones who we target and say, we need to transition away from that. They know that if they use their dollars to invest in renewables, then their economic and financial sustainability is assured. So that's why you go to them. We develop relationship with countries like these because they also are part of the same theater that you sit in. CARICOM is 15 votes, 15 countries, maybe 10 votes. But they need our support. And if you need our support, you must understand that we need your support as well. So even though there will be emergence of countries around the world that may not have been aligned to our philosophy of democracy, we nevertheless are prepared because of the breadth of our policy, because of the pragmatism of our foreign policy, to work with them to achieve our own goals and our own ends.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the Middle East. Of course, President Trump's first trip in his second term is to the Middle East. He currently is in Qatar as we speak, having traveled to Saudi Arabia, and so they're making overtures as well to the Middle East. All right. So, of course, St. Kitts and Nevis, as you mentioned, in moving towards non-traditional partners and expanding our diplomatic footprints or diplomatic engagements with countries who we may not have been traditionally aligned with, I think Nigeria stands out. Of course, we've had a long history in terms of students coming here to study, but of course, the Prime Minister recently led a delegation there to an African Caribbean summit that was held there, and there were a number of agreements that were signed, MOUs, there were exchanges that were agreed to, there were some developments in terms of passing on of technology and collaborations, the development of an economic zone. Talk to us, sir, about how your ministry is helping to facilitate this transition to engage more with Nigeria and other African states.
Right. I think there's full support for the Prime Minister in going to Nigeria. Because Nigeria is one of those huge countries in Africa that we believe can do more with regard to our own economic and people development generally. So back in 2014, just before I left the office in 2014, I traveled to Nigeria with the foreign minister of St. Kitts and Nevis at that time. It was the foreign minister, Nisbet from Nevis. He did not get to Nigeria with me because there were some issues in London. So I was in Dubai. I traveled over to Nigeria, Abuja, and opened our consulate there. But it was the idea and was being pursued by Foreign Minister Nisbet at that time. And I just completed it because there were some issues. Because we saw that Nigeria was going to be important for us. Today, therefore, with the visit to Nigeria by the Prime Minister and his delegation, I think that was critical, because Nigeria must continue to be seen as one of those countries in Africa that potentially we need to work with very closely. Before our time, in the days of Sir Robert Welling Bradshaw, he went to Nigeria and spoke to Nigeria glowingly on many, many occasions. And we are at the point now where we need to exploit that initial contact. You mentioned a number of things that were so in MOU, exchanging a number of areas, technology, economic zone, and so forth and so forth. These are critical. One of the important things I think we need to do is to ensure that the Citizenship by Investment program, that it gets into Nigeria. It was on that basis that we had started the overtures to the Nigerian government, because we were there. A lot of people from Nigeria were coming into our program. We wanted people to know that just becoming a citizen is not enough. We are open for investment opportunities. Come visit us. The problems of visa travel through Europe and so forth, very, very problematic in those days, and we felt that it was our duty to ensure that this was possible. So we need to continue to pursue what would have been started in Nigeria. And I believe that these important developments are going to advance our own development, economic development. We believe that investments in infrastructure, investment in airlift, critical. Just as we see it critical in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. At the end of this month, I'll be going to Kuwait. The government of Kuwait invited the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Minister, to come and let us sit down and discuss a number of areas that they think we need to discuss for our investment future.
And when these invitations are extended, of course, they come with full funding in terms of travel.
Yes, of course,
Right,
of course.
right.
Well, in this case, of course,
Yes.
the entire delegation is going to be paid for by the curator government.
Right. All right. And so, with just about 5 minutes left, Dr. Douglas, it's
Yes.
unfortunate that there is such a time left. But in terms of COFCO, as I mentioned,
Right.
of course, the regional, the CARICOM foreign ministers, they met here, and there were some key issues. But I'll leave that to you to highlight what you would say were some of the more important outcomes. Of course, we could discuss about Venezuela, Guyana. Persons, a lot of them are concerned about that, but that doesn't necessarily have an impact on our citizens. Of course, when it comes to, we want the CARICOM region to be a zone of peace. Very important as well too. And so there are those issues with Guatemala and Belize as well. But Haiti is also a critical concern for us here, Dr. Doug. So I'll leave it to you in just about 4 minutes to tell us some of the key outcomes.
Right. You see, the COFCO meeting usually is one where we examine the foreign policy of the Caribbean community, and we go through the list of countries and organizations at the multilateral, bilateral level that we need to be at one with. And so getting a consensus of who we will support as candidates from various countries come before us, that is important. Sometimes we take decisions that, okay, since a country has a bilateral interest, you can vote as you feel like, and then that says to us we can vote as we feel like. But there are some areas that we do not have any choice of voting. And so support for what is happening in places like Haiti, that has full support among us. We believe that the situation in Haiti has not advanced in the way that we would have expected it to advance. The security issue in Haiti is still very troubling. The security issue is preventing the consolidation of the democratic changes that we would have expected by way of a secure and fair election regime. Those are not yet achieved. There are concerns as to why they have not been achieved. But in the meantime, we still have advances of gang warfare to the point where if you were to compare the loss of life, killing, last week there was comparison being made. What is happening in the Gaza? What is happening in Haiti? The numbers are very similar. People don't understand that. The numbers are similar, and that is not sustainable. So we need to make sure that at the Security Council level, there is clarity as to what is going to be the policy of support by the big boys at the UN for Haiti, because Haiti for us, situation is unacceptable. Apart from the situation in Haiti, Guyana and Venezuela. These are two countries that are friends of St. Kitts and Nevis. They are within our space, hemispheric space. We know that challenges have been made with regard to Venezuela and the electoral process, but at the same time, we know that Guyana and Venezuela have a matter, a dispute, well, a controversy that is at the level of the court. And so we are saying to all, friends, non-friends, let the court decide on this matter. To disrupt it by doing things prematurely is not going to bring about the solution that we want for friends. Guatemala and Belize. Guatemala is trying to seize or claim significant portions of Belize. That's unacceptable. It is very true that some of these are throwbacks from the colonial days. Haiti, Do you know what Haiti had to pay to France? And so matters like those were discussed in our meeting last week. Somehow we need to engage France and say to France, come on.
More responsibility.
Yes, you have to accept more responsibility for this. And so we're saying same thing. Let us wait upon the ongoing activities of solution to these border issues. Let them play out properly. And then hopefully the area will be settling down and we will have more focused attention on our development, more harmonious development and economic development for our country.
Dr. Douglas, we are out of time, but before we leave, I should mention that, of course, at COFCO, and persons listening to this program would have heard two voices during our previous break. It would have been the Secretary General of the CARICOM Secretariat, Dr. Carla Bennett, and also the then outgoing Chairman of the COFCO Council, Dr. Vince Henderson from Dominica, and both of them expressed confidence in your leadership. And so certainly we look forward to seeing how these regional matters will be resolved, being led by St. Kitts and Nevis at the CARICOM level. So thank you so much for being with us, sir, and we look forward to having you again on InFocus sometime in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us for this edition. We pray that you will join us next week at the same place, at the same time, for another edition of InFocus. It's your government, your business. I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.